Before I start with the list, I should probably say a few words about what DC's All-In actually is. Basically, it's one of those resets DC is so fond of doing every few years, where they launch fresh books and storylines as a way of letting new readers get on board. And so far, this reset seems far better than most. Partly, I think, because they didn't feel it was necessary to have some supremely complicated crisis storyline that rewrites everything preceding it. I mean, there is a bit of that sort of thing. Darkseid left Earth Omega. That's the primary reality for DC's continuity, and moved to the Absolute Universe, which is a parallel world, the parallel world, that together with Earth Omega is one of the poles of the multiverse. But so far, besides from the all-in-one special that kicked all of this off, all of this is pretty much in the background. What you do need to know is that there are two worlds where the stories take place. The mainstream universe, where the Superman you know, Batman and all the rest of them live. And another universe, the Absolute Universe, which is harsher than the mainstream one, darker. Where the mainstream universe can be seen as being modelled around Superman, this one is built around Darkseid. But that doesn't mean that the villains are going to have things going all their way here. There are still heroes, versions of the same heroes that live in the mainstream universe. But these heroes are young, and they have the odds stacked against them, and they lack a lot of the advantages we typically ascribe to them. I've read that it's DC's version of what Marvel did with its Ultimate Universe. That's probably true enough, though there does seem to be more to it than that. How these two universes will interact with each other, well, we'll have to wait and see. So far they are distinct, which is good, as they both have stories to tell that would only be ruined by some multiverse nonsense. I mean, a time will come for all of that, but it's not now. Moving on, I also want to mention the reason that I waited until now to present this list. All-In books were released almost 2 months ago now, so I could have done it sooner, but I wanted to get a proper feel for everything, and that meant waiting until now. Until the first issues of just about everything had been released, and I had the chance to read them. I say just about, because there's always something new on the horizon, but I'm confident that all the major releases have now been released. Okay, so on to the list. The end of Absolute Power. Okay, I know this is being a bit negative. Sorry about that, but it's true. The whole Absolute Power thing was just a bit blur. Blur story, blur villain. Amanda Waller is the epitome of blur to me. So a crossover that's all about her? And I wasn't much more enthused about the Amazo robots. Failsafe is decent, and the Brainiac Queen has potential. Maybe even a lot of potential. But neither were properly exploited here. Both were pretty much just standard heavies. That's not to say that I thought it was awful. I enjoyed parts, the contributions of certain writers and artists, certain issues, and by that I mean individual comic books rather than topics raised. I can't think of any of those sorts of issues that struck a chord with me. But on the whole thing just felt unnecessary and bloated. Often these company-wide crossover things do. Overall, I'm not a fan of them. Some of you must be, otherwise they wouldn't keep doing them, and to each their own. And again, I don't find them truly awful, they just aren't my favourite. I think the main problem anyway, is just how manufactured they feel. A committee of writers and editors got together and cobbled something together because they had to, rather than because they actually wanted to. And then, instead of keeping the story as tight as possible, they intentionally added as much schlock as they could, so that collectors needed to buy 50 issues rather than 5. Again, the individual comic book type, not the topic type. And these 50 issues never coalesce into a story that's in any way consistent in tone. Dozens of different writers, artists, and characters don't allow for that. Anyway, bottom line, I'm glad that Absolute Power is over. Action Comics goes weekly. In and of itself, this is not necessarily a good thing. DC has a history of, every now and then, turning a title, normally action or detective, into a weekly. And the results are typically not great, as they come with the probably expected decline in quality of both art and writing. But that's not the case here. This is a weekly title that's actually decent. Not brilliant, not earth-shattering, but good. It's a title that I'm never the most excited about, but one that I'm always happy to spend some time with, which as a weekly I view as quite the accomplishment. What's more, in addition to the main Mark Waid, Clayton Henry storyline about Superman venturing into the Phantom Zone, there is a backup story about Supergirl. Now, these backup stories have always been something I've liked in theory. I'm not going to complain about some extra pages. But in practice, they sometimes feel like a little bit of a chore to read. More often than not, they don't add too much to the story, but you still feel you have to read them, just in case this time they do. But I didn't feel that here. This story, about Supergirl transporting a mysterious prisoner in the depths of space, is actually enjoyable. The creative team on Superman. So Dan Mora is doing the art for this, and it lives up to his high standards. I mean, I know taste in something like art is personal, but personally he's one of my favourite artists in the medium right now. So his work on this title is reason enough to check it out. Fortunately, it's not the only reason, as Joshua Williamson is still doing the writing, and he has always been pretty dependable. Without giving too much away, the story deals with a future version of Doomsday, called Time Trapper. As you probably know, Doomsday evolves and resurrects each time he is killed, so that he can't die in the same way twice. This means that the Time Trapper, who comes from the distant future, hardly resembles the current Doomsday at all. Not only is he slimmer, but he's also clearly very intelligent. The reason he has come to the present is that he wants Superman to kill him one last time, so that he can take his final form. Something that won't be in the universe's best interests. It's still early days, but this is potentially an interesting story. Also, Doomsday has long been one of Superman's greatest foes, but he's always been one-dimensional. This changes that, though it does raise the question of whether Time Trapper can even be considered the same character. Another question is how this Time Trapper relates to the Legion of Superheroes foe with the same name. Is it a reinterpretation of that same character? Or is he from a different future? Don't know. Guess we'll have to wait and see. Another element Williamson has worked into the story is that Lois Lane has gained powers and is flying around as Superwoman. We don't know the details of how she got them yet, but however she did, Moira's art makes her look fantastic. Wonder Woman is still as good as it was. As I said earlier, in general the whole point of All In was to start new titles and new story arcs, so that new readers could jump right in. Which I mean, great, do that. If I were a new reader, I'd obviously be in favour of that. And as someone who's been following DC for a good long while, it's also great. New titles and new stories, I'm all for that. However, there were 3 titles I was enjoying very much, just as they were. Nightwing, where Tom Taylor's story did end, but it ended well, and it ended on his terms. Batman Superman, World's Finest, which, because it happens in the past, isn't a part of All In anyway. It did lose Dan Mora as the artist to All In titles, which sucks, but he was probably going to move anyway. And I can't complain about the art since he left, so all's good there. And then there's Tom King's run on Wonder Woman. Here, we are in the real meat of the story, so stopping to begin something new would have been a disaster, relatively speaking. Fortunately, that's not what they did. They just let King continue to tell the story he was telling. And 2 issues into the All-In era, that story is as good as it was. Better, because we finally get Trinity's origin, and the showdown with the Sovereign is heating up nicely. The start of the Absolute Superman saga. Absolute Superman is great, really one of the standouts. It's written by Jason Aaron, who's probably best known for his work on Thor, and a fair chunk of other Marvel stuff. But here he is at DC. Not for the first time, he's currently also doing Batman Off-World, which has nothing to do with All In. And he actually wrote for DC's Vertigo imprint before the whole Thor thing. Anyway, his presence is welcome, because I think his ability to combine the grand and the gritty, the heroic and the grim, which was on full display during his run on Thor, is a perfect match for Absolute Superman. This is a story where Kal-El's father wasn't the greatest scientist on Krypton. He could have been, sure, he was clever enough to have been. But this Krypton has a far stricter caste system than the one we know. So when Kal's parents spoke out of turn, they were relegated to the Labour Guild. And on Earth, things didn't run any smoother. Kal was never adopted by the Kents. He doesn't have a fortress of solitude, and he doesn't work at the Daily Planet. Instead, he roams the world, using his power to help the exploited, mainly those exploited by the Lazarus Corporation, a multinational that uses alien technology to force migrant laborers to do their bidding. And one of the agents they've hired to do this forcing is Lois Lane, who meets Kal right near the end of Book 1. Oh, and observing all of this, from Lazarus's headquarters, is Brainiac. Or I should say, someone who looks like Brainiac, because this is a new title and a new world, and who knows what surprises they have in store for us. We finally get to appreciate how good Black Canary really is. Okay, so there's a new miniseries called Black Canary Best of the Best, and it's written by Tom King, who I realize is not everyone's cup of tea, but he is mine. Which, as I say, it sounds sort of sexual. Really didn't mean it that way. Anyway, he's not the reason I've got this book on the list. Not the main reason, anyway. The story is about a fight between Black Canary and Lady Shiver, to see who's the best fighter in the world. 6 rounds of 6 minutes each. The series is also 6 issues. It seems that each issue will deal with one of those rounds, as the story goes back and forth between the fight itself and Canary going back home to train with her mother, the original Black Canary. King's the writer, so it's a bit deeper than that. A bit deeper than the typical Rocky sequel. But it still seems to have everything we like about those Rocky stories. Okay, so why is it on the list? I suppose because it gives Black Canary her due. You see, one would be forgiven for not taking Black Canary too seriously. After all, what does she have? Her sonic attack, the Canary Call. Okay, that's a proper superpower, but when you compare it to the breadth and intensity of the powers of some of the other members of the Justice League, Superman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, I could probably do a 30-minute video just running through all the abilities the Martian Manhunter has. So by those standards, the Canary Call is just a little tame, and extremely limited. But there's another way of viewing the character, one I've only come to appreciate a little more recently. Black Canary is as skilled a warrior as Batman is, and Batman is every bit the equal of Superman or Wonder Woman. Obviously he's not their equal in how much he can bench press or in how fast he can run, but in terms of value to the team, he's their equal for sure. So Canary, who is someone who has a lot of his skills, she certainly has his combat skills, and also has a proper superpower. Well, that's a combination that belongs on the team too. So I hope this miniseries goes some way in highlighting those skills, in showing the world just how kick-ass she can be, and thereby allow fans to appreciate this mainstay of DC Comics a little more. The absolutely fantastic Wonder Woman. Lately, DC has been doing a pretty good job of combining superheroes and more traditional fantasy fare. The most obvious example of this is the Dark Knights of Steel stuff, but Gotham by Gaslight's Kryptonian Age also has a lot of Lovecraftian imagery and themes. And now there's Absolute Wonder Woman, which has the same fantasy feel, but isn't set hundreds of years in the past. Just an alternative reality, the Absolute Universe. And I'm not disappointed in the least. The story just works, at least it does for me. And the art? Well, it's probably not for everyone, but with its Grecian feel, it just fits the story, and it differentiates it from everything else out there. Okay, so the basic story here is that Diana is the last of the Amazons. As a baby, Apollo placed her with Circe, who has been exiled to live on an island in hell called the Wild Isle. And so it's Circe that raises her and trains her, and it's on the Wild Isle, rather than Paradise Island, where she meets Steve Trevor. Which means that this is all very much in keeping with the idea of the absolute universe, where familiar stories are told, but are altered to fit into a much harsher world. Continuing this are things like the Pegasus that Wonder Woman rides is skeletal because it's not just a Pegasus, it's the Pegasus, the one Perseus and Bellerophon rode in myth. And the Pegasus died a long time ago and now dwells in hell. And Wonder Woman's main weapon is no longer her lasso of truth. It's Nemesis, a weapon made by Circe from the remains of the last basilisk. It subjects those it ensnares to pain in proportion to the pain they have caused innocents. Continuing this similar but not the same trend, Wonder Woman leaves hell to defend the world against fantastic monsters, reminiscent of kaiju or again the cosmic horrors of Lovecraft. The scale and importance of this are balanced with smaller moments, like Diana meeting Steve again, or her deftly putting men who underestimate her in their places. So it has a bit of everything, but not too much of anything. The fact that they're far from done. All In debuted about 2 months ago, and there's already been a lot of good stuff, and the titles I already think are good will hopefully continue to be good for quite some time. But there are still other titles and stories to come. Some of those have already been advertised. I'm lukewarm about some of these, things like the Superwoman one-shot and the Two-Face series, but I'm excited about others. There's a New Guard series, and I've loved the New Guard since I was about 10. Loved them, but always felt that they've never been treated properly. Yes, obviously you can argue that Jack Kirby handled them properly when he wrote them in the 70s, but that was a long time ago, and when you read those books now, it feels like a long time ago. But since then, the characters really haven't advanced much. So it's a tall order to advance things and still stay true to the creator's vision, especially when that creator is someone as revered as Kirby. Hopefully this run manages that. Then there's the Metamorpho title. Visually, Metamorpho is a brilliant character, but his stories have never really risen to the same levels. So again, hopefully that changes this time. There's also a new Challengers of the Unknown, which, as it happens, is a team I've wanted to learn more about. So perfect timing. Lastly, and I'm really excited about this, Hush 2 is coming. The original Hush storyline teamed Jim Lee with Jeff Loeb for a 12-issue run in the pages of Batman. And what a run it was. Guest starring Superman, it pitted Batman against just about every major villain in his rogues gallery and set new standards for the title. And in, a few months? Starting in Batman number 58. They're doing it all again. With Lee, with Loeb, and with Scott Williams doing the inking and Alex Sinclair doing the colours. They've even got Richard Starkings back to do the lettering. So, yay! Scott Snyder's Absolute Batman. Scott Snyder is back writing Batman, but this isn't the same Batman he wrote before. This is the Absolute Batman. And he's probably the character that defines All In better than any other, because Snyder, more than any other, is the architect of the Absolute Universe. So it's a perfect storm of awesomeness. A writer who has already proven himself to be one of the best Batman writers ever, united with a new, fresh version of the character he wrote so well, and in a setting that's also new, and so far, pretty awesome. Okay, so what makes this new Batman new? Well, he's young for a start, about 20, just starting out on his path as a vigilante and a hero. And he's huge, about 6'7" of heaped muscle. The mainstream Batman, the one we've grown up with, is as mentally strong as it gets. He's also pretty damn strong physically, but he's probably not quite the strongest. That gets reversed in the Absolute Universe. This Batman doesn't look like he'd have a physical equal anywhere in the world. At least not a non-superpowered one. And while he's also incredibly intelligent, he's not the smartest man on the planet. This Batman is also much more brutal. The ears of his cowl can be removed and used as blades. His chest insignia can be taken off and used as an axe head. And he isn't shy about using these weapons. He still doesn't kill, but he's quite happy stabbing or chopping off the occasional hand. He's also not rich. His mother is a social worker, and his father was a school teacher who was murdered during Bruce's 5th grade class trip to the Gotham Zoo. It's this trauma that spurred Bruce into becoming Batman. And as for Bruce himself, he used a football scholarship to get himself into university, where he could learn all that he needed to become Batman. He's now a blue-collar civil engineer who knows the city better than the back of his hand. So he knows all the nooks in half-completed skyscrapers that would be perfect for a temporary base. All the crannies in subway systems that could make a good hideout. It's still not clear how the Gotham he lives in is any more harsh or violent than typical Gotham. I assume this is because typical Gotham is already pretty harsh and violent. It could just be the type of harshness. In traditional Gotham, the violent madmen are outsiders. In this Gotham, well, the Joker is as fabulously wealthy as Bruce traditionally is. So the violence and madness could be more institutional. Although I don't know how they would show that when old Gotham has so many crooked cops and corrupt politicians, and more than a few billionaires who are up to no good. All of this is conjecture because, so far, it's been Batman up against a gang called the Party Animals. Again, Batman has faced gangs before, most famously in The Dark Knight Returns. So maybe that's what we have in store for us here. A brutal war of attrition. I can think of worse stories. Before I continue, I have a few honourable mentions. Things that almost made the list, and things that, once the dust clears and I have a clearer perspective, could turn out to be better than some of the things that did make the list. Who knows? Green Arrow is a return to what this character is so good in. A tense, somewhat gritty, street-level story that focuses on him as the central character. Nightwing. Tom Taylor's run was both fun and had a good story to tell. This isn't a combination that's all that common. But his replacement, Dan Watters, seems to be up to the task of doing the same. Speaking of Tom Taylor, he's now trying his hand at writing detective comics. And so far so good. It's still too early to tell how good. What I can say is that if I had the rest of the arc in front of me, it's definitely good enough that reading it would be what I'd want to do tonight. I also thought I'd tell you about some of the things in All In that I'm not crazy about. Nothing's perfect, so it isn't. But I'm not going to harp on here. These are little things. I only have minor gripes. The first of which is that they made Lois Lane Superwoman. Okay, I have nothing against Lois. I honestly don't even mind that she's Superwoman. Hell, Superman, the title that deals with her in this new role, is at number 8 on my list. And her inclusion in that story is one of the reasons for that. But I just feel... Well, isn't it about time that Kara, Superman's cousin and the current Supergirl, became Superwoman? She's been Supergirl since 1959, and it just feels like it's time for a change. I mean, Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, has already been promoted from Superboy to Superman, and he debuted less than 10 years ago. True, it's less than ideal that there are now 2 Supermans and 1 super-man, but that's a problem that's been around for a while, so it isn't part of this. Second thing, why did DC go out of their way to make things as confusing as possible? I gave them credit for not ushering in this era with a crisis, and I stand by that. But the origin of the Absolute Universe is still more than a little confusing. And what do they do to remedy that? They give the universe 3 names: the Absolute Universe, the Alpha World, and the Elseworld. And just so we're clear, this Elseworld has nothing to do with their Elseworlds line, which deals with alternative versions of their heroes. Except, of course, that the absolute versions are alternative versions. Madness, I tell you. It makes it all as clear as mud. And the naming structure of their prime universe is even more infuriating. Lastly, in Absolute Batman, Bruce made 5 lifelong school friends: Eddie, Harvey, Ozzy, Waylon, and Selina. In another life, these would have been Riddler, Two-Face, Penguin, Killer Croc, and Catwoman. Okay, so I don't know where this is going, and Scott Snyder could have something epic planned, but at the moment it just feels a little cute. A little like DC superhero girls, where all the superhero kids go to the same school and are best friends. To be clear, this element of the story hasn't been intrusive enough to affect my enjoyment of the series. And depending on Snyder's plans, I suppose it could become one of my favorite parts of the book. But at the moment, I'm not convinced. The introduction of Justice League Unlimited. It's the return of the Justice League, and that on its own is reason for celebration. Probably reason enough for it to be on this list. For me, the Justice League has always pretty much been my go-to. If I could only read one DC title, it would be it. It's an easy way to catch up with the major players, to spend time with all your favorite characters if you don't have the time, or the money, or even the inclination to spend time with them all individually. It is also a title that typically has the most important storylines. After all, for all the top heroes to be needed, the threat must be momentous, which means that these stories are the ones around which the others take shape. It also often has the top creative teams. I'm thinking of pairings like Jeff Johns and Jim Lee, or, going way back, J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen. And that is as it should be. If you're teaming up the greatest superheroes, it's only right that you get people to do it who can do it justice. But the Justice League has been missing for a while now, ever since 2022. And while I understand that there were reasons for that absence, I've never thought that they've justified there being no league. Anyway, it's back, bigger than ever. That's where the Unlimited part comes in. Normally, the Justice League consists of 7 or 8 of DC's top heroes: Wonder Woman, Batman, Flash, Superman, the best of the best, the most famous of the famous. Occasionally others take their place, but that's generally the case. The idea with Unlimited is that all of DC's heroes are in the league. So rather than the occasional team-up, all of them, the Titans, the Justice Society, the Bat Family, the Super Family, lesser-known heroes, the original Justice League, they're all working together in this one huge team to make the world a better place. It's the same idea as the 2004 cartoon series with the same name. Loved that cartoon, by the way. So I'm happy to see a modified version of it coming to mainstream DC continuity, even if it has taken 20 years. Okay, so it's bigger. But is it going to be better? Frankly, I don't know. But with Mark Waid doing the writing, and Mora the art, a pairing I hold in the same esteem as those others I mentioned, I have high hopes. Okay, so there you have it, the whole list. Please tell me what you think, what you agree with and what you don't. And talking about what you can tell me, I have another question. I suppose it could have arisen because in doing this video, I was thinking of leagues. Or it could be because Jason Aaron is mentioned. But I've been thinking about the League of Realms Aaron introduced in Thor. Basically, this was a team from across the 9 realms, put together by the Congress of Worlds to deal with a Dark Elf sorcerer, Malekith, who was going around killing other Dark Elves in an attempt to get them to unite under him. They've had other missions since, and the roster has changed here and there. But the initial team were Thor from Asgard, Sir Ivory Honeyshot of the Light Elves of Alfheim, Screwbeard, a dwarf from Nidavellir, Ogmunda, a mountain giant from Jotunheim, Lady Waziria, a dark elf from Svartalfheim, and a troll named Ud. There was no representative from Midgard, Earth. Later, with roster changes, that would change. There'd actually be two, Ros Solomon, a young S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and Spider-Man, neither of which felt like a perfect match. So my question is this. If they were going to star the League of Realms in their own series, or even make a film about them or something like that, who should Midgard's representative be? Who would be the perfect fit? I've been limiting my choices to Marvel characters from Earth, but there is no reason for you to do that. This is the League of Realms after all, so characters from other planets, or even from other realities, would fit in there as well as anywhere. Okay, that's it for this time. Please like and subscribe, and comment if you have anything to say. Thank you for watching. I hope you come back.